Cool. All right, so kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome to another of our earthquake early warning webinars. And if you're new to this group, just really want to welcome you. And we regularly host webinars on the topic of earthquake early warning. And usually we invite international experts to talk about their experiences abroad. But today is quite special because we as a team are bringing to you our findings from our community engagements that we conducted in 2020 and 2021. So just quite briefly, just want to introduce the team because there's a lot of us. But for this work on engaging with the communities, team is Raj Prasanna, Julia Becker, Anna Brown, Kristen Stock, Emily Lambie, Alicia Tsui, me, and advised by Cassie Kenny and supported by the Toy Area team who helped us facilitate the workshops. So really thanks to everyone from the team to make sure that these community engagements happen. So you'll hear more from us throughout this webinar session. All right, so can we get to the next slide, please? All right, so just some housekeeping. So be mindful on being on mute. I think everyone's on mute, but if you want to speak, make sure to unmute yourself, raise your hand, and yeah, so we'll be able to ask you to speak. Now, just a little task for everyone so that you get to know the Zoom setting. So if you can look for the chat box, and can you please write in your name, where you're from, your organization, and your role, so people would know who you are, because it'll take forever for everyone to introduce themselves one by one. But just find a chat box, type in your name, and yeah, and the rest. Yeah, good morning, everyone. Yeah, and we have guests from the US as well. So I don't know what time it is in the US, Fiona, but welcome.
Thank you. It's 3 p.m.
Not too late then. All right, so thanks. We see that there's a range of us, like we've been holding these community of practice webinars, and definitely a lot of us from different organizations. So great to see everyone around today. So just some tips as we go through this webinar. Just avoid interrupting the speaker. So we'll probably get through the entire presentation, then we'll open the floor for questions. But feel free to always utilize this chat box. So now everybody knows where it is. Use this chat box, put in your questions, and then Alicia and I will be monitoring this, and we will raise these questions as we go into the Q&A. And there's also virtual raise hands as well. So if we don't notice you, just put in that virtual raise hand so that we'll be able to see that and ask you to speak as well. So, and the earthquake early warning is a very interdisciplinary topic. So we all have different perspectives, different paces, different spaces in the journey of our research and practice of earthquake early warning. So just please demonstrate mutual respect and enjoy the session. And as we already mentioned, we are actually recording the session. Cool, so that's it for virtual housekeeping. I'll hand it over to Julia, who'll just give us a bit of background on earthquake early warning in New Zealand.
Kia ora koutou. Yeah, I'm just going to give a little bit of a background on what we kind of know and what's been done so far and what led into this project. I know that some of you will be familiar with the studies that I'm going to briefly talk to, but just bear with me for anybody new in the room. Essentially, I've been sort of involved in thinking about earthquake early warning for, yeah, I don't know how many years, probably since about 2015 or 2016, where we sort of first started having conversations about earthquake early warning and whether we thought it might be of benefit for Aotearoa New Zealand. I think at first there was a degree of sort of perhaps skepticism that it might actually be useful and beneficial because we're such a small country and we have such a small population. But I think as time has evolved and we've had some more of these conversations, I think that essentially people will sort of start to see more of the benefits and perhaps uses of earthquake early warning. So early on, we decided to do a couple of studies where we sort of scoped out what people thought the benefits might be for Aotearoa. And it sort of started off by a study that was funded by the Earthquake Commission, where we were looking at the societal benefits of earthquake early warning for Aotearoa, New Zealand. Now, there's earthquake early warning systems that have been operating overseas for quite a few years, but obviously we don't have anything in New Zealand that at that time that was comprehensive, that was giving earthquake early warnings to people. So we really just wanted to see what people thought the benefits would be. And essentially, there were two parts to the study. There was a part of the study where we went out and we talked to different sectors, so people like emergency managers, health, education, lifeline sectors, to really kind of ask them how they thought earthquake early warning might be beneficial. And then the second half of it was a survey of the New Zealand public, which was also, I guess, and at the same time, we did a survey in Japan to try and kind of align some of our survey questions so that that's sort of a linked survey. But we found from that first study that New Zealanders did support earthquake early warning, and they did see some benefits for Aotearoa. So the primary benefit was really around life safety, health and safety. So those moments that you get before earthquake shaking arrives, when you get the warning, and you can perhaps drop, cover and hold, you can turn off essential equipment, you can and things like computers, shut them down perhaps, and allow yourself kind of some time to be able to take those actions that might either help you in terms of life safety, health and safety, and or keeping your business running, turning off your essential equipment. The second main benefit we found, which sort of surprised us in a way and aligned with some of the results that we found from the survey that we did in Japan, was really that people valued earthquake early warning for this psychological preparedness. So the idea that they would get a few seconds perhaps to think that there might be some shaking coming, and to prepare themselves mentally for what they might need to do to protect themselves from that shaking. So that popped up as a really important component of some of the benefits of earthquake early warning. Some of the other benefits people saw included this activation of emergency plans, being able to assess the situation, kind of, I guess, mentally prepare yourself for what you might need to do in response to the shaking. And the organisational and site-specific actions that might reduce impacts in aid, response and recovery. So things like overseas, they might shut down trains or slow trains. Perhaps it's not necessarily transferable to New Zealand in some contexts, but we do have trains here, so you could do that. Stopping lifts, those types of actions that would help with reducing impacts. So just moving on to the next slide. Some of the other components that popped up, particularly out of our focus group discussions that we had with the different sectors, was that there was a desire for a nationally integrated earthquake early warning system. So people didn't know exactly what that might look like, but they were keen on ensuring that there were kind of networks of sensors, that the messages were consistent, and when you were giving out a warning message, that it was consistent across perhaps different systems, whether it's, you know, a national GeoNet type sense system, or whether it's an in-house alerting system or a mobile system. They wanted consistency across kind of this idea that you were responding to warnings, but you also had inbuilt the mitigation and preparedness aspects of earthquakes as well. So kind of combining the warnings and the preparedness for a holistic earthquake risk solution. And they wanted it to be cross-periods. So in particular, people talked a lot about tsunami, and they wanted to know that they could get a warning for the earthquake shaking, but then it was also going to be linked to a tsunami warning, for example, if you lived on the coast. So thought of how you might link those together. And there had been some experience of in-house sensors in New Zealand, so some people had used those before. So it wasn't entirely new to everybody, but there was some experience there. So just on the final slide, some of the challenges that popped out, and maybe challenges that we discuss a little bit more in some of the findings from our recent workshops, include the sectors preferred using earthquake early warning for easy to turn off and on functions. So if you were shutting down your water, for example, and it was going to prove to be too disruptive to residents for quite a long period of time, then they weren't so keen on shutting that off on receipt of a warning in case it was a false alarm or in case the earthquake shaking wasn't that much. So they wanted it for easy turn off, turn on functions. There are challenges in motivating effective response. In our survey in Japan, we found that only around 3% of people took a protective action like drop, cover, and hold. So how do you get people to take an effective response and when they receive a warning? They wanted to desire for flexibility in setting the thresholds of the shaking. So some sectors kind of wanted them higher, some lower. Different geographic regions felt that maybe they had different thresholds. And there are also challenges in developing messages, channels for public education, and training that were discussed. Cost obviously came up. And then there was this need for wider conversations and partnerships around earthquake early warning, which is sort of where we've got to, I guess, with this project, looking at kind of community practice and these community workshops. So that's me. So thank you. That's a bit of the background of kind of where we started before this project. So I'll pass it on now.
All right, I think it's me, Marian, right? So so my task is basically to give you guys an kind of overarching overview of the project for this current phase of the project. So as Julia mentioned, motivated by the early findings, in this current project, our team wanted to explore more about having an earthquake early warning solution in Aotearoa, New Zealand. For this particular project, we have received funding from the Earthquake Commission and Massey University SIF funding to explore further on the EW solutions here in New Zealand. So in this particular project, we try to explore specifically whether it is feasible to develop an earthquake early warning solution consisting of low-cost detection devices installed in our community. So it's kind of a specific focus, specifically working with the communities, looking at the low-cost solutions. But broadly, we want to learn from the communities as well, their understanding, their expectations. So if I go into overarching key aims or key areas of the project, the first, so we have three broader areas we are looking at in this particular project. The first key area we wanted to focus is to build a community of practice where we try to bring relevant stakeholders together who are keen on earthquake early warning. This is primarily with the aim to create a platform for interested parties to share ideas and knowledge about earthquake early warning. So we try to bring researchers, practitioners, academia as a kind of a platform together to share and understand each other. So this has led us to organize engagement activities with the community of practice like this, for example, including workshops and webinars. And most of you may have attended some of those sessions. So when I look back, I feel we have managed to bring most of the interested parties together in New Zealand. And going forward, this can become a platform or springboard for the discussions of developing an EW solutions which is more appropriate for New Zealand. So that's one of the expectations. So the second key area we wanted to focus is to make close engagements with our communities to understand their expectations, needs, and concerns with regard to having an earthquake early warning solution in New Zealand. We identify this as a very crucial aspect when developing any technology solution, not only EW solution, especially a technology solution directly impacting our communities and to be used during emergency situations. So we passionately believe this kind of engagement is really important in this type of work. So from the beginning of the project, we have been engaging and talking to different cross sections of our communities in New Zealand. We identified this as a very important. And today what we are going to share is what we identified from those engagements. So finally, and importantly, the third key area we focus in this research is assessing the technical feasibility of low-cost sensor deployed in households to generate earthquake early warning. So this is a kind of a more technical aspect of the project. For this, we have been experimenting on developing low-cost sensor network architecture. The approach we are taking is to see how we can use capabilities and capacities of sensors itself to do most of the tasks like data processing, running the algorithms, generating the alerts. And going forward, we are planning to discuss our technical findings with you as well. Like this, we'll meet in the future. At the moment, we are in the process of deploying sensors in the communities in the Wellington region. Some of our community members kindly agreed to host some of the sensors in their homes, and we are in the process of installing them at the moment. So you'll hear more about the progress of the technical work as well. And I must tell you at this stage, so as Marian mentioned earlier, so our team comprised of social scientists, behavioral experts, seismology experts, risk communication experts, and people who are working in the sensor networks department as well. So I wanted to thank everyone for all the support. So I'll pass on to Anna to talk more about the community engagement results and findings.
Kia ora koutou, my name is Anna Brown, and I'm going to be presenting the findings from the Toiaria team. And I just want to say thanks to my team before I start. So Tim Parkin, Andrew Tobin, Anna Reid and Matt Law, some of whom I think are here today. Just thanks for the amazing mahi on this project. So as you can see, this project, as Raj was saying, wasn't just a single place at Massey University. So there's three parts that led this particular piece of the project. So the Joint Centre for Disaster Research, obviously, the Massey Geoinformatics Collaboratory, and Toiaria, which is the research unit that I run. And I think the important thing about knowing a little bit about this is that, we were people that came together with very different methodologies and views. And we'll do a bit of a reflection on this at the end, but it wasn't necessarily, there wasn't necessarily a belief at the beginning that, this was going to work. So I think there's a really lovely process that developed and respect for each of our different kinds of methodologies and approaches. So a little bit about Toiaria and the methodology that we used. So I'm a participatory designer. And that means that in my field, we're interested in the views of the people most affected by the decisions that are being made. And I guess not just expert voices in this space. We completely understand that expert voices are important, but we also believe public voices are important. And I guess part of this is to understand how to express the voice of the public and to show that they're very articulate about what their needs are. So this presentation is really going to be showing you what the communities told us, and largely with their voice. So we make sure that community voices are prominent in our presentations. So we have a methodology called the Comfort Board, and we developed it through a number of projects from about 2016. And the process is participatory. It means that people engage in the project with us. And it's, I guess, experiential, and I'm going to take you through what it does. But our aim in this methodology is to create meaningful conversations and facilitate them with communities that are affected by the decisions that are being made. We use real scenarios, modelling situations and exploring variables that are of interest to the researchers. Participants are invited to deliberately demonstrate their views with levels of comfort with the scenarios using a common sense trust benefit matrix, which is the one that you can see here. And then participants are invited to identify what would increase their comfort, in this case in an earthquake early warning scenario. And the scenarios, just to show you how this works, people turn up, we have the comfort board, they have a scenario that's read out, and then they position themselves on the board. They're asked to identify and prioritise the themes and concerns that they consider most important, increasing their comfort in this space, and then encouraged to have frank and open decisions in the workshops on the basis that the findings are reported anonymously. So you see here, these are the sorts of scenarios that we wrote up and engaged with our publics. In this case, we had 5 scenarios, and they went from a sort of present day future scenario through to a 10 years scenario where an earthquake early warning system was rolled out across Aotearoa, New Zealand. And I think I saw a number of faces on the call that actually engaged in some of our community workshops. So want to thank you for your input here today as well. And so when we were developing these scenarios, the research team had particular things that they wanted to explore. So the first was obviously to educate the publics we were talking about what an earthquake early warning system might be. Then to dig into the actual way of putting and installing sensors in a home and the particular pieces in that here actually around what it would cost and what sensor maintenance would do. And then in the last three scenarios, there was a data integration element. So what would happen if you added data or brought in other data pieces? Then a scenario exploring updates and alerts and actually false alerts and how people would feel about that. And the final one we named community preparedness, but in fact was, 10 years on, you have an earthquake early warning system in New Zealand, and actually human behavior means that even if you get a warning, you might not do, as Julia said earlier, you might not drop cover and hold or follow some of the directions that you're given. So we're really making sure that in these scenarios, there's some ambiguity and that the conversations are really uncovering all of the needs of the community. So I guess it's important to know who it is that we spoke to. So we ran 8 workshops over around 10 to 12 months with a number of COVID scares in the middle of it. So that's always complicated. And those workshops were with general public, so people who had no prior knowledge of an earthquake early warning system. They were also with Māori communities, communities in earthquake areas and communities that had specific needs around tsunami warnings, and also publics with experience of large earthquakes. So we were really trying to make sure that the people that we were speaking to had a lot of knowledge. And this is the high level findings from the work, and we're going to unpack each of these sort of spheres in our Venn diagram, but just to tell you a little bit more about what we heard from the communities in Aotearoa. So I guess the main thing is that they wanted a people-centered approach to an earthquake early warning system in Aotearoa, and that is that it wasn't solely a technological approach, but really had to think about people, place, and protecting those people in their place. And I guess this Venn diagram is trying to say that in all of these pieces, you can't take one, you can't just take technology or the tools or a communication lens or a human behavior lens, but you have to bring all 3 of those things together. And when you do that, you need to have a very clear evidence base about how the system might work. You need to inform people clearly, and you need to make sure that all of those processes of informing people are inclusive. And this comes out in the words of the public. So people, place, and protection. Really, this was this concept that whatever was developed or whatever might be developed in Aotearoa, New Zealand, needed to be holistic. So all of the elements come together, and that you prioritize human needs over technical requirements or feasibility. So I guess this was very clear from the publics we spoke to. And here you see how the process works. This was in the emergency management office in Lower Hutt. And it really is a great way to get publics to engage in a topic that they might not have a sense of early on. So this is probably the first and most new finding that we had from Julia's work. And that was that whatever is done in an earthquake early warning feasibility process, that it needs to be done in partnership with Māori. And you see here this quote, and I'm going to read you a few more, but Māori need to be part of any conversations like this, otherwise you only get half the story. An earthquake early warning network based solely on sensors should not be the starting point for this. So what we heard from many communities, and not just the specific Māori community that we spoke to, is that the development of a system for Aotearoa needs to be done in partnership with Māori leadership and shared decision making. And this requires a full engagement of Māori in communication, in delivery, and in training. There was also some suggestions that a bilingual delivery would be a useful thing. Engagement with Māori should also be based on relationship building and trust, and building on local knowledge and community networks, and allowing for Indigenous and non-Indigenous knowledge coming together. And I have a few more quotes. So we have 1,000 years of geoscience done from an Indigenous brainwork. It's knowledge of where the earthquakes have struck before and how they have impacted, and the sort of information feeding into risk analysis. Indigenous science needs to get traction. And when the system gets designed, Māori should be part of that system, so that when significant decisions are made and monitoring can be done, the right questions will be asked. And this last one, there's a lot of information in this community, and this is meaning in this Māori community. Not so long ago, we had a rush of quite strong earthquakes centred just off the shore in Horowhenua, which is a coastal town in New Zealand. And geoscientists were saying that this is the most unusual thing in this area. But if you talk to local iwi, the original inhabitants, they would say that we have a long history of having big earthquakes. So I think there is a lack of knowledge in terms of predictive behaviour. I want to know where the early warning sensors are located. So I guess this is really make sure Indigenous knowledge and non-Indigenous knowledge come together. This is the beautiful marae that we visited and the community that we engaged with, Whakarongotai marae in Waikanae. So the next thing I guess to cover off is that there was a lot of positive responses to an earthquake early warning system in Aotearoa. And I guess this is a great quote in summing up the views on this, is that previously you had no choice. The earthquake hit, you had no choice to ask, can I go upstairs to get my child? Now you actually have that choice. You might use it wisely, you might use it unwisely, but you actually have an option. We're all in that top corner, this is talking about the map, of trust and benefit, because we now have that choice and voice. And I guess what we heard from the communities in New Zealand was that they had a positive response to it with caveats. So they wanted to know and make sure that there was evidence that it would work. They did say that any prior warning was better than nothing. And they accepted that building an earthquake early warning system would be iterative and might not necessarily work immediately, but the desired benefits would require the community to get behind it. And that having a choice to act and choose for the best option for them was better than not having that. So here's another quote. I like that it gives me the opportunity to prepare and to be able to be ready. Any forewarning allows for a readying of your emotions. Anything's better than nothing, potentially. So there are always caveats in these conversations. And another voice, having the alert might enable me to take 2 steps and drop under a table, which you can't do once the shaking starts. It might give me that couple of seconds to take 2 steps across the room, which I don't want to do when the floor starts moving. And here another image of how these processes work. So a holistic approach. We spoke earlier about the community saying that you have to bring everything together. And I guess what the community's told us is that warning systems need to be considered with other earthquake preparedness approaches, and not just a single technological standalone initiative. So here we have someone saying it'd be interesting to see a bigger focus on community going hand in hand with a focus on technology, a full package that connects people with people, especially those that are isolated. That's the real issue, not surviving the earthquake, but surviving after the earthquake. This needs to be the full package. So the public told us that a system like this needed to be treated as part of a larger system that prioritises the needs of communities in an earthquake. And a holistic approach would look at community needs even before an earthquake would begin, such as assisting community connections and improving support and care. So here are some more voices. It's great getting all of this data, but if you don't care about the people out there, then what's the point? If you're going to all of this expense, then include people. Take a holistic approach that balances humanity with technology. You don't want to be over-reliant on one particular thing. As individuals, we've got to be able to read the signs, because technology is inevitably not always foolproof. And a last voice here, if you can put it forward as a civic duty, that would work. If you have $75, then you're contributing to society and contributing to science. So a more altruistic perspective, like the team of 5 million. And just for those of you who haven't seen the scenarios, we suggested in a scenario that publics might have to pay a $75 fee to have a sensor in their homes. Again, that was a future-based scenario. So inclusiveness. Now, I think probably inclusiveness was one of the most consistent things we heard from the communities in Aotearoa. And this is really, there's two parts of inclusiveness here. We've separated them into including people in the process and an accessibility lens. So in inclusiveness, there's this concept that everyone needs to be considered in the design of a system to ensure that the benefits are extended to all people. And communities are diverse in Aotearoa and encompass a wide range of ethnicities, ages and abilities. So an inclusive system needs to work with people both technologically and wider, and should include inclusive communications that promote the system and educate people about ways to respond. So here we have someone saying communication and education needs to go hand in hand with these initiatives regarding systems and technologies. And it has to take into consideration everyone in our community, including the elderly, people with autism, people with anxiety disorders and intellectual disabilities. Another voice, my daughter is special needs, autistic, so that's a concern for me. I can see the benefits of an early warning system, but some groups do get overlooked in their response to things like this. And another voice, it's different for my migrant community because their resilient levels are different, because they don't see the issue as being as serious as some others. The information hasn't gone to that community well enough. And another voice, there is an exclusion happening here. Māori are always excluded from these conversations happening between companies, institutions, agencies and the public from participating in this kaupapa. But we're the first ones to be asked when anything happens to come up and help post disasters. Without our resourcing, you wouldn't have anything. So this inclusiveness lens was very strong across the communities, and also was exploring the idea of inclusiveness and accessibility. So making sure that whatever warnings there might be would work for all. So under accessibility, you see this idea that whatever is designed needs to provide equal access and equal benefit to everyone. So that's regardless of where you might live, your financial capability to buy the system, or your ability to engage with technology. So this means that people without phones or internet or live in areas without digital access need to be included in any kind of warning, and that people will need to be able to participate in this initiative whether or not they can afford the sensor, whether or not they have internet connectivity, and even for some people if the electricity costs are prohibitive. So here you see the community vocalising this very clearly. There are lots of pockets in New Zealand where you can't get a cell phone reception, not only in rural areas, but also in town. This won't take into account them or the way they respond. It could ignore whole populations in New Zealand. So the communities we spoke to were very concerned about making sure that everyone could be part of this. Another voice, I work with people that don't have the internet. A lot of them don't have phones and they don't have power. So what do we do with them? Do we forget about them? And another voice, it's all very well for people who have internet and power, but I work with a lot of people who don't have the internet and sometimes don't have power because they can't afford it. So they don't have cell phones. So what the publics were telling us is that whatever system was built, we needed to think about all people. Now, multiple warning modes. I guess this comes through from the accessibility lens, which is if you don't have access to all of these things, or you have other needs, that needs to be thought about in the process of designing these things. So in the event of an earthquake, the public's told us that the delivery of a warning should be communicated through multiple forms and channels and not just one mode. So not just the technological mode of an app, but through community sirens, radio, and all these other things. So some people are hard of hearing or deaf. So there's a way, is there a way of getting beyond, so is there a way of getting notified beyond just an alarm on the phone? Is there also going to be something like a flashing light or a vibration? This is not a one-size-fits-all scenario. at the end of the day, the way you get notified needs to be personalised. And so I guess thinking about multiple communities and their needs, people who might not ever use a phone or only use phones at certain times. And the public suggested that warnings could be connected to other systems, including tsunami warnings, fire alarms, and sirens. Here's some more voices. So this is for earthquakes. So will we get another warning coming later for a tsunami? You can't have one without the other, because in the back of adults' minds would be, is there going to be a tsunami? And can we just put a sensor and a siren in every suburb and do that way so that everyone is included and everyone can hear? The other lens that comes through all of these conversations is that you can't have technology without excellent public engagement and excellent communication of the needs. So I think what we heard from all of the publics we spoke to, that the success of an earthquake early warning system will require effective communication throughout the process. And I think what they articulated to us, that would include a public outreach program to get community buy-in, and that those programs needed to be done through multiple channels, such as radio, TV, and of course, social media. And that when you educate the public and communicate with them, you have to do it providing clearly what the objectives are of this process and the benefits to the public. They also told us that when you engage with the public, the way you do it is important. So here you see someone saying, it's important to have a continuous dialogue and to provide quality information. Things like, this is what we have found out, and we are moving ahead because of these findings. This will give me more trust and confidence. And as the project moves forward, I'll be more engaged with the whole process, seeing that the country is getting some benefit out of it. And another voice, I do understand it's probably for good purposes, but it would be good to know a little bit more. Who has created the model? Who is collecting the data? How does it work? Stuff like that. This would give me a lot more confidence in the system if I knew that the organisations involved knew what they were doing. So as we often find, the public are very savvy and want to understand the benefits and evidence that these systems would work. And I think particularly thinking about who's collecting the data and who's using the data was something that we hear often in these conversations. Linked directly to public communication and engagement is this concept of education and training. So I think you can't have a system without the education required to tell people what to do after you get a warning. So I guess what we heard from the public is that any kind of earthquake early warning system needs to provide best practice examples of what people should do in responding to earthquakes, and think about how you do that in different situations and with different warning times. So here you hear someone really articulate this clearly. There is another really important thing. You can give people a warning and you can have the infrastructure and you can have sensors and all the rest of it, but people aren't used to these things. And if there's no drills or no practice involved, the end result is going to be the same blind panic. So I think it was great to hear that the public understood that you can't just have a system without all of the component parts of how a system would work. So here another voice says, that 20-second warning definitely gives you a choice. That's where the pre-planning and education and scenarios and the things we can do beforehand come into play. It's all about planning and education and testing. And another voice, what would I do with a minute? Run onto the street? Is that safe? There needs to be education to explain what you can do with a minute in different situations beyond the drop, cover and hold. One of my favourite engagements in this process was having an earthquake educator in one of our workshops who loved all of the different scenarios until we got to the last one. And then he suddenly understood that if you had an earthquake early warning system in place, you'd have to really think about the communication. So he said, it's hard enough to teach the public to drop, cover and hold. But in these situations, we're suggesting that there are a whole set of more elaborate educational elements to present to the public, and he could see how difficult that would be. Here you see us showing some of the publics what these sensors looked like. And so that's what the community has told us. Oh, I think there's a little bit more. Here we go. One of our scenarios was around false alerts. And these are the things that came out of these conversations. So a worry around fatigue and anxiety. So here you see the public telling us that there is this sense of disaster fatigue. You know, there are many apps and many processes in our lives telling us about these. So we really need to understand people's concerns around fatigue in these spaces. So my concern is it's going to increase anxiety. I've worked recently with the youth mental health. I've worked with single parents and the elderly. And if you think about how many earthquakes there are on a day, if you've got an alert that goes off all the time and you've got mental health issues or your anxieties are already high, I think this is going to exacerbate it. So what we heard is that just understanding how communities manage, I guess, the psychological well-being issues that could be a part of this. The next is around false alarms. So we heard a lot from the publics around their tolerance of false alarms, which is very high generally, especially if they were followed up, if a false alarm was followed up quickly with clear communication about what was actually happening and providing a reason for why that alarm had happened, and plans for addressing the issue in the future. So I guess it depends on how often you get a false alarm. I'd rather get a false alarm than no alarm and for an earthquake to come through. But I'd want to know why there was a false alarm. Is it the system or the network? And what will they do so it doesn't happen again? It would be good to be getting a bit more information. We also heard from the public that you can have a system like this, but it must be accurate and it must be reliable. So any infrastructural development has to be reliable with its technology as well as other things. So here we hear the public saying, it seems illogical to depend so much on infrastructure that's so vulnerable in a serious earthquake, power, internet, and cellular coverage. Another voice, what happens if you're in a black spot? Does the system work if the network goes down? Is there a backup battery? And I'd have more trust if we could be confident in how robust our systems are. I want to know that our telecommunications networks won't fail, because if that happens, how will I get a warning on my phone? Just going a bit faster because I can see the timing. Data and privacy. So of course, with any technology-based system, there's an element of collecting data and sharing data. And as we've found in other data projects, the publics are very clear about raising issues that are important to them in this space, particularly around data privacy and data governance. Many people talked about big brother issues, particularly when we made a suggestion in one of our scenarios that we might track via mobile phones people's movement in an earthquake. People were very interested, and I guess wanted to be assured that data collections would be done well, and they raised issues such as data hacks, data breaches, and lack of trust in government systems. So here you hear someone speak, if you get a sensor, then surely there has to be some kind of identification number. Someone somewhere would be able to know where that unit is. So does that raise some privacy issues? I'd want reassurance that all information about me and the data would be anonymous. And second to last piece is around customization and settings. So one of our scenarios talked about the ability for users to self-customize when they might get an alert. And what we heard is that some people felt that it was very important to be able to customize the technology, and others felt it was quite an issue to have the ability to change that because they felt that they might not get it right. So here we hear someone saying, being able to personalize all the setup is important because all houses are in different locations with different strengths and locations of earthquakes. Different people have different feelings for the strength of any earthquake and when they feel danger. So they wanted to be able to change that. And other publics said to us, I think the ability to set the thresholds is dangerous because they wouldn't have the context to understand. This is the same issue with GeoNet's felt reports, and some people say extreme for a moderate earthquake. It erodes the benefits. And another person saying they need to have some kind of control when it comes in to the different degrees of shakes. Like if it's a 4 or under, the alarm won't go off, but you'd need some kind of advice about this. Otherwise, people might set it too high. So I guess this is one of the areas where there was quite different views about the benefits and the drawbacks of being able to customize the settings. And finally, on a piece around location tracking, which was something that we suggested in one of our scenarios, the public's, some public understood that using data to track people's movements would have benefit. However, they really did want to know how that data would be used, and the way it was used was important for people's uptake of this space. And I think what we heard from the public was that to get participation in this sort of level of data integration, there would have to be very robust privacy processes and clear information about how that location tracking would be used, including in terms and consent. So here you have someone telling us, monitoring your movements everywhere you go. I'm not sure I trust that entirely. I would like to know why exactly tracking data is being used to find out how you have reacted and how that actually helps. Why does knowing what I did or stayed in bed or got under a door frame actually help? Opting in definitely makes a difference. So there you have the key elements of what we heard from the public. And I guess what I'd like to say is that these processes are important to have public voices in, because they are very good at articulating their needs and their worries, and that particularly here, that a holistic approach to an earthquake early warning system is vital. So I think I'm handing over now back to Marion, is that correct? For a few other elements.
Yep. Thanks, Anna. Thanks for the really comprehensive high level findings. And we will be sharing these findings to everyone as well. So we did compile all of these components, and we'll be sharing that with everyone. Yeah, and I guess just like really emphasizing that looking at this thing holistically. So talking to the communities and seeing what their perspectives are. But I think we also learned as a community of researchers, or as a team, that this is quite earthquake early warning is a really it's a big complex thing, and we've definitely learned a lot through this process. And I just invite some of my team members if they would like to share a few thoughts about this process. Perhaps Kristen, if you have anything to add, to share about this collaboration that we did.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, hi everyone. So yeah, it's been a really interesting project actually, because we've got a real mix of people with different backgrounds. And myself, I'm from geographic information science and computer science, not so much the social science side of things at all. Whereas there are a number of other team members that are much more working on social science, and you've heard from Anna that the methodology that we used is very much based on people's perspectives. And so, yeah, I found the experience really interesting from that perspective. And I think a couple of people have mentioned before this issue of respect for different perspectives. And I certainly felt that was the case. So rather than people trying to sort of, I guess, encourage or force perhaps people to see things from their perspective, there was respect for the different kinds of knowledge that we each might want to draw out of this data. So some of us were interested in the way that people are thinking and feeling about the situation. In the case of an earthquake where we have some small early warning, how would that affect them psychologically? From my perspective, I was interested in the technical aspects and how we can, I guess, feed in some of these issues about people's feelings and responses and how they think they would respond in these situations to how we actually design a system. And that's sort of some of the research we'll be taking forward from this. So this gives us a real framework about the aspects that are important to people. And then the next step will be, or one of the next steps, because there are others as well, but one of the next steps will be how we can then link that into how we actually design an app or a website or one of the other multiple methods that we might use to convey this information, because that was one of the things that came out of it, as you've heard, that we need to be considering different modes of delivery and different needs of different individuals. So so that's been really interesting for me, this link between the technical and of course when we're designing systems we always consider users anyway, but in this case it's been a much deeper consideration than I'm certainly used to, which I think will really result in a much stronger product when we actually get to the more advanced stages of the technical design. And the aspect of interest, a lot of my research is about the data side of things and how we can use the data that we could collect from these systems. So one of the scenarios we designed, and this is the beauty really of Anna's methodology, that it's because it's a methodology that she has applied to multiple projects, but because you have the ability to design scenarios, you can address particular aspects. And so we did have one of the scenarios that was around data integration and how you might combine data from the earthquake early warning system with some other, say, social media, council data, all of this, and how people responded to that was really interesting. So yeah, so that's a quick summary of my perspectives on the project.
Thanks, Kristen. Yeah, so we do have a few more minutes, and I wonder if Cassie, if you're online, if you could also perhaps give a bit of reflection on the project's effort to engage with, let's say, with the Whakaronga Taimarai, and any, I guess, tips for the other researchers here as well.
Okay, so the strengths. It was challenging, I think, for the team, because for a lot of members of iwi, it was not a priority, and that is because of what I would call locale knowledge and patterns of behaviour. That said, the feedback that I've had is that the early engagement at the start of the project was really appreciated, because Māori are so often left out of the mix or brought in for a token engagement as researchers or as participants. The feedback from the community was they really appreciated that the team was really courteous, that they enacted manaaki. They liked the fact that they met virtually the whole team before the project started, not just team leads. So this was seen as mana enhancing behaviour, and also they've really appreciated the fact that Raj has continued to maintain that contact, because it's seen as genuine engagement and not and that makes them more interested in engaging with a community of practice. In terms of what they wondered about, they're wondering about potential support for gaining subsidies for EEW sensors, because they know they're not cheap, and while some iwi have deep pockets, some of the smaller iwi marae don't, and some of the what we would call ngā mata waka or urban marae don't. Going forward, they'd like to see funding that brings in Māori early research career individuals into the team, and also a commitment to building community-based research capability, so that if there are people that are interested, if you train them up to do, for example, the comfort board, they can come out and support the initiative through the links that they have with other marae. While there is work going on around seismic warnings in schools, they are interested in exploring the potential for engagement with kura education programs, specifically linking seismic technology with Mātauranga Māori and STEM social science curricula. So I don't know, I don't think you've gotten that far with the kura, but what's been interesting for me is that because everyone's related up the Wellington coast, people come back and make comments. So I've heard from a few of the teachers at the Otaki Kura, which brings us to the next question. Next factor, te reo Māori, really, really important to have that and be sharing information before the projects even start or next phases. Anna talked about the people-centred approaches. the kaumātua at Whakarongotai, and also some of the other marae are interested in people and environment-centred approaches, because for the Māori communities, the environment is part of the family from a Māori worldview. And that also links into mobilising emergency management elements of iwi management plans. Finally, there's a little bit of scuttlebutt going on in the different Māori communities I'm part of around exploring the possibility of setting up Māori networks that leverage into iwi and inter-marae relationships, and that have been sort of formed and supported by Manaaki and whakawhanaungatanga. So I think that'll do for me. Quick enough, Marion?
Yes, that's good. Thanks, Cassie. Thanks. All right. So before I give floor for the others to chime in, if there are people that have questions, I think Gavin asked a question in the chat box, and I think Anna answered that one as well. So yeah, does anyone have any questions that they want to ask? So hopefully it was quite clear, but yeah, so we'll be sharing these research findings later on, but maybe I'll give a chance for Emily, who's worked with us from the start of this project, and just give a little bit of insight. And if anyone has any questions, please just pop the questions in the chat box or raise your hands.
Thanks, Marion. Kia ora, everyone. I'm Emily Lambie. I used to work with Marion at the Joint Centre for Disaster Research. So my research background is in human behaviour and earthquakes, and so the big pull for me into that area was living through the Canterbury earthquake sequence as a geology student. And then I've also had roles in science communication as well. So in terms of this project, I think when it was getting kicked off, it was really when we were sort of thinking about, technical systems as social systems. And so my observations in the workshops that we've had have really been around the methodology allowing for a rolling dialogue and empathetic discussion. So the people that participate in our workshops really get a sense of where they sit, and they explore their own comfort level at the same time that another person is doing that. And I think that that just allows for an enriched conversation to come to the surface. So as Anna sort of mentioned, we have used other scenarios for not just earthquake early warning as well. We've looked at doing a creative resilience masterclass, where we actually introduce different variables through the scenarios, where people had to, one of the people in the group sort of either lost their hearing or went through an earthquake, and they actually experienced some lived realities of what an earthquake, what you can experience in an earthquake or in, sort of disruption. So I think, I guess the biggest observation in all of it has been that the methodology really allows people to have this platform mindset. So technical systems are inherently complex, and the fact that we do introduce some key educational learnings around the realities of earthquakes really does allow people to think about that and think about what that means for a technical system, but then they realize what their needs of that technical system is. So yeah, I think those are just my key observations.
Cool. Thanks, Emily. So we do have a question from Alistair, but giving some time for Tim to cue Tim as well. I'm going to ask him a question, but a question from Alistair was that, was there any research into automation versus warnings for people to take action on? And I don't know, Julia, if this is something that you want to respond about automation and people's warnings, especially coming from the two studies that you've done.
So that's a question for me, is it?
Well, it's a question for everyone, but I thought that you might have insight on it. On automation and warnings for people to take action.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we didn't really, in the studies that we did, we didn't really unpack it in its entirety. So we talked a little bit about automated actions, automated warnings versus procedural warnings. And there was obviously a a degree of, discussion about both and about the benefits of both. And again, I guess some of the automated stuff came up with, if it's easy to turn off and on, then by all means we should automate things, but perhaps not automate, anything that was, too difficult to turn off and on, like gas, for example. Perhaps, there wasn't like a huge amount of support for gas or water. But yeah, in terms of protective action, I guess because most of that is procedural and it's based on you getting an alert, I guess that's the only automated part of that's kind of useful for people. So yeah, like I say, we didn't sort of unpack the whole range of different actions, different automated useful actions that people might be able to take. It was just discussion of a few different kinds.
Thanks, Julia.
Marion, I know we're 2 minutes over time.
Yeah.
But I wondered if Caroline would tell us her experience of being in this process, because I always loved your explanation of the beginning of the project versus the end of the project. Oh, you're just on mute, Caroline.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I guess I had a kind of an epiphany through going through the process with Anna and her team. Because I'm a scientist, I'm a seismologist, and so I work in the science side of earthquake early warning algorithm, and so where Anna and her team wanted to take me along is a journey where we would give as little information as possible to the public or to the audiences from these workshops. And it was really frustrating for me because I was thinking, how can they provide any useful feedback if they don't understand the nitty-gritty of early warning science? And I sat in one of those workshops, and I have to say I was really impressed about the, I guess, how rich the information came out from having not this really tight framework that I was going to impose on them from what an early warning can actually provide to them. So yeah, I was really impressed, and it just comforted me in the fact, that so for an early warning system to be successful, you have three components there. You have the science part, and the science part is really mature. We have like amazing advanced algorithm at the moment that we can test. And if you're really far from the earthquake, they will be successful. You will be able to provide some level of warning, even for shaking that won't be felt. So in the science part, it's quite successful. Then so that's quite a big circle because you can be quite far away from the epicenter of the earthquake. Then there's the second part is the technological aspect. And so that one relies, on sensors technology and on communication technology as well. So that's the other circle that we can squeeze in to start to bring a tighter space for early warning. But the really important one, and this is the part that we really need to the last circle that we can squeeze in is the societal success. So this is the circle you're squeezing in around the epicenter to actually start providing some useful warning for the public or for different infrastructures. So it's really just going through back to the workshop, it really confirmed to me that engaging with the public and understanding their needs is a key success to an early warning in New Zealand.
Thanks,
Awesome.
Caroline.
Thanks, Caroline. All right, so I know we are already 5 minutes over time, but I think team's still happy to answer any more questions. But otherwise, just maybe another minute for people to put in a question. But hopefully this was quite interesting for people, and then we will be distributing the results, the high-level results booklet anyway. Thanks for
there was a question,
patience.
sorry, Marion,
Yeah.
there was a question about how many sensors. So we have limited budget, of course. So plan is to install maximum of 25 sensors. We have already installed sensors in some of our colleagues' homes, but at the moment we are installing sensors in community places and homes. So probably in another month or so, we'll finish installing all the sensors. That's maximum of 25 sensors. Yeah.
And I guess just to highlight that it's an experimental stage at this stage. So we're testing, it's an experiment, it's not a full-fledged solution. Yeah. And I guess before just signing off, we just really want to thank the people that help us make these workshops possible. So there's definitely a lot of organizations and people that were involved in getting all these workshops. So we just want to thank Arewa Library and Library Community, Quaker workshop attendees, Tasa Cafe here at Massey University, REMO, Whakarongatay Marae trustees, the Marlborough Civil Defense Emergency Management, the Southern Community, Hut City Taxis, the Cozy Club, the Waikanai Surf Club in Gisborne. So all of this is not possible without good engagement and really participation from the communities wanting to have these conversations with us, and really thank them for their effort to get these workshops done. And yeah, and I guess that's it from me. Thanks everyone. Thanks for your patience, and looking forward to the next stages of this research.
Thanks, Marian.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.